The city never slept. It was a place built on trade, fear, and shadows. High towers of steel and rust stretched into the smoke-filled sky. Strange lights flickered above broken streets, and alien voices echoed in the distance. Deep inside this city was the marketplace where only the darkest bargains were made. It was known as the Market of Shadows. Here, everything had a price: weapons, secrets, lives. Nothing was safe, nothing was sacred. The ground was wet with oil, the air heavy with smoke, and the smell of metal and blood mixed together. The people who came here were dangerous. Some were bounty hunters with glowing red eyes. Some were merchants with sharp teeth and quick lies. And some were simple slaves, silent and broken. But tonight, the market had gathered for something rare, something cruel. At the center stage stood a tall cage made of black iron. Inside, four small alien sisters huddled together, their glowing blue skin hidden under rough brown cloth. Their hands were tied with rope, their big luminous eyes filled with fear. They were young, helpless, and beautiful in a fragile way that made the crowd whisper. No one knew where they had come from, but everyone knew what was about to happen. A booming voice cut through the noise. Step closer, step closer, all of you. The voice belonged to the Overlord. He was huge and ugly, with pale skin stretched tight over his skull. Two short horns curled from his forehead, and his mouth twisted into a cruel smile. He wore a robe of gold and black, heavy with strange symbols, and on his long fingers were rings made of bone and blood-red gems. His name was whispered with fear across the galaxy. He was the kind of alien who fed on weakness, and tonight he wanted to feed again. The Overlord spread his arms wide. For sisters, for rare little gems from a world long forgotten. They will serve, they will obey, and they will never disobey. Who will start the bidding? The crowd pressed forward. Eyes shone with greed. Voices rose in excitement. Numbers were shouted. Credits promised. Weapons offered in trade. The market was alive with hunger. The alien sisters trembled in silence, clinging to each other, hoping someone, anyone, would save them. But in this place, there was no mercy. In the far corner of the market, half hidden in shadow, stood a human. He was tall but tired, his clothes torn, his armor dented. His face was scarred, his eyes heavy with pain. He looked like a man who had fought too many battles and lost too many wars. Yet, there was something about him that was unbroken. His gaze stayed fixed on the cage. He had nothing, no money, no power, no allies. He was a stranger in this cruel place. But when he looked at the sisters, something inside him moved. A memory, a promise, a fire he thought had died long ago. The bidding grew louder. 5,000 credits, shouted one alien with 4 arms. 10,000, cried another. A merchant with teeth like knives. 15, roared a tall creature with metal skin. The Overlord laughed, enjoying the storm of greed. But then, a new voice cut through the air. A human voice, strong, steady. Outbid. The crowd froze. Silence spread like fire. All heads turned. The Overlord narrowed his eyes, searching the crowd until he saw the human step forward into the light. Gasps rose all around. A human, someone whispered. He has nothing, another hissed. Is he mad? The Overlord's cruel smile widened. You dare to bid against me. You, a broken creature of flesh and weakness. The human did not answer. His eyes stayed on the sisters, who now looked at him with a flicker of hope. He clenched his fists. He had no wealth to give, no army to back him. But he had something else, something the market could never understand. The Market of Shadows held its breath. The bidding had begun. The market stood in silence, as if the air itself had turned to stone. All eyes were fixed on the human who had dared to speak. His voice had not been loud, but it had carried weight, enough to cut through the greed and noise like a blade. The Overlord stared at him with disbelief, his cruel smile twisting wider as if he had found a new game to play. The human stepped forward, and the crowd moved back without thinking. There was something in his presence tired, scarred, but unshaken. His armor was worn down to scratches and dents, his boots covered in dust, and his face carried shadows of 1,000 battles lost and won. Yet his eyes were steady. They did not flicker with greed like the others. They held something deeper, something the market did not understand. The overlord's laugh rumbled through the air, cruel and mocking. A human bids. Look at him, my friends, look at this poor, broken creature. Tell me, human, what will you pay with? Your empty hands, your broken sword, your worthless life? The crowd joined the laughter, their voices echoing through the metal walls. But the sisters in the cage no longer trembled the same way. They looked at him through the gaps in the cloth tied around their heads, their luminous eyes wide with a hope they had not felt since their capture. The human raised his hand. I will pay with everything I have. The words were simple, but they struck the crowd silent again. He had not shouted them. He had spoken them like a promise, like a vow. The overlord narrowed his eyes, curious now, his cruel grin fading into something colder. Then let us begin, the overlord said, his voice like a knife. 5,000 credits. 6, shouted a merchant, eager to win. 7, cried another. 8, someone from the back offered. The human stood still, his face unreadable. He waited, and when the overlord turned to him, expecting silence, the human spoke again. 10, gasps rippled through the market. 10,000 credits. Where could he possibly have that much? But he did not explain. He did not need to. His voice carried the weight of truth, and the crowd leaned closer. Caught between disbelief and curiosity, the overlord sneered. Bold words. Do you even understand the cost of this, human? Do you know who you are standing against? The human did not answer. His gaze stayed locked on the sisters. He saw their small hands gripping each other tightly, their fragile bodies pressed close in fear. Something inside him burned hotter with every passing second. He remembered another time, another place, where he had failed to save the innocent. That memory had haunted him through every night. Since, tonight, he would not fail again. The bidding rose higher. The merchants shouted, the hunters roared, and the overlord watched with cold amusement. Each time the human raised his voice, the market grew more restless. He offered his weapons. He offered his armor. He even offered his own labor, his future, his life. Each word he spoke felt like a strike against the chains of cruelty that held the sisters. The crowd could not look away. There was something different in this fight. This was not greed. This was not power. This was something rare, something dangerous. The overlord's smile returned, sharper than before. He leaned forward, his long fingers curling over the edge of the stage. You struggle, human. I can see it. You are weak, exhausted, broken, and yet you keep raising your voice. Tell me why. Why fight for them? They are not yours. They are nothing to you. For the first time, the human's eyes left the sisters and turned to the overlord. His voice was calm, steady, and strong, because no one else will. The words hit the air like a thunderclap. The market fell into silence once more. Even the cruelest of merchants hesitated, their mouths half open, their greed paused for a heartbeat. The overlord growled, his pride wounded, but his game was not yet over. Very well, human. Let us see how far you can crawl before you break. The bidding war raged on, numbers climbing higher, promises growing darker. The human kept answering, his voice never shaking. With every bid, sweat dripped down his face, his body trembling from the weight of his own gamble. He had nothing left, but he offered it anyway. The sisters pressed their faces to the bars of the cage, watching him. For the first time, they believed. For the first time, they thought they might be saved. The overlord's eyes burned with rage now. What had begun as amusement was turning into fury. This human, this worthless creature, was standing against him before the entire market. If he lost to a man with nothing, his power would crack. His voice shook with anger as he shouted his next bid. The human took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel his strength fading, but he could not stop. He would not stop. He looked at the sisters one more time and saw their hope reflected back at him. That was all he needed. The market was alive with fire and fear, with whispers and gasps. All waited for the human's next move. All wondered if he would fall at last, or if he would keep climbing beyond reason. He opened his mouth, and the bidding continued. The bidding carried on like thunder rolling across a storm. Voices clashed, rising higher and higher, each shout heavier than the last. Yet the one voice that carried through them all was the human's. Every time the overlord tried to drown him out with power and pride, the human answered with calm determination. His words were never loud, never desperate. They were steady, like the beat of a war drum. The crowd leaned closer with every new bid. At first they had laughed at him, mocking the idea that a broken man could fight with nothing. But now the laughter was gone. Their eyes stayed locked on him, their breath caught in their throats. Something was happening here, something no one in the market of shadows had expected. The human's armor clinked faintly as he shifted his stance. He looked tired, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, but his eyes never left the cage. The first sisters clung to each other, their glowing blue skin shining faintly in the dark, their ropes cutting into their wrists. Their small bodies trembled, but their eyes stayed fixed on him. They no longer looked at the overlord, or the crowd, or the guards with their sharp weapons. They looked only at him, as if their survival rested on the strength of his voice. The overlord raised his hand, silencing the restless crowd. His face had darkened. His cruel grin twisted into something harsher. Enough, he growled. You play a dangerous game, human. Do you even know what you are doing? Do you know what you risk by standing against me? The human's answer was simple. I know. The overlord's eyes narrowed. Then why continue? You are not rich. You are not powerful. You are already broken. Why give away what little remains? The human's fists tightened. For a moment, his gaze flickered downward, to the scars on his hands, to the armor that carried too many memories of failure. Then he looked back up. Because I refuse to let them suffer. Not again. Not while I can stand. A murmur swept through the crowd. The words cut deeper than any weapon. This was no act of greed, no bid for power. This was something purer, something stronger. Some in the crowd shifted uneasily, as though shame had touched their hearts. Others grew angrier, offended by the idea that anyone would defy the rules of cruelty that bound the market. The overlord sneered, lifting his chin high. Then pay. Human, pay with blood, with bone, with the last breath in your lungs. His voice turned sharp as he roared his next bid, a sum so high the crowd gasped. No one in the market could match it. The sisters whimpered, hope faltering in their eyes. The human's body shook. His strength was nearly gone. His resources already stretched beyond the impossible. Yet his lips moved, and once more his voice rang out. I raise it. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The market could not believe what it had heard. A human with nothing had matched the overlord's bid. The crowd surged with whispers, each one louder than the last. How does he keep going? What does he have left to give? The overlord's face twisted with fury. His pride had been cut open for all to see. He slammed a fist against the iron bars of the stage, and the sisters jumped in fear. His voice thundered, shaking the floor. You cannot win, human. You are nothing. You will always be nothing. But the human did not flinch. His voice was quieter this time, but it carried farther than the overlord's rage. Then let me be nothing, as long as they are free. The words echoed through the market, hanging in the air like fire. Even the guards, who had never known doubt, shifted on their feet. The crowd could no longer deny what they saw. This was not a man clinging to life for himself. This was a man ready to burn away everything so that for children he had never met could walk free. The overlord growled, his pride cracking into rage. He leaned closer, his teeth bared, his rings glinting under the dim lights. Very well. Let us see how far your weakness can carry you. Raise your voice one more time, and it will cost you more than you can pay. The human lifted his head, sweat dripping down his brow. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. He looked at the sisters, and for a moment, the noise of the market fell away. He saw only their fear, their small hands clutching each other, their silent plea for mercy. And in that moment, he knew he could not stop. I will pay, he said, his voice steady. With everything, the crowd erupted in chaos. Some shouted in disbelief. Others cheered with wild excitement. The overlord's fury shook the walls. The sisters pressed their faces to the bars, tears shining in their eyes. For the first time since their capture, they believed freedom was possible. The human stood trembling, his body breaking under the weight of his promise, yet unbent, unbroken. He had nothing left to give, but still he gave, and the bidding war raged on. The air inside the market grew heavier with every passing second. The crowd could feel the tension pressing down on them like a storm that refused to break. The human stood in the center of it all, his body trembling with exhaustion, his face pale, but his eyes still fixed on the sisters. Each breath he drew sounded rough, like his lungs were made of iron scraping against stone. Yet he refused to look away. The overlord's voice rose again, cruel and sharp. His words cut through the silence like blades. You think you can outlast me, human. You think your pitiful strength will carry you through this game. I was born in power. I was raised in cruelty. You are nothing but a shadow crawling on my floor. The human did not answer. He stood tall. Though his knees felt weak beneath him, his silence was louder than words, and it angered the overlord more than any insult could. The crowd shifted. Uneasily, some were waiting for the human to collapse, to finally admit defeat. Others leaned forward, desperate to see what would happen next. No one wanted to leave, not even for a moment. The market had become a stage, and every heart was trapped inside the story unfolding before them. The bidding went higher still. The overlord shouted impossible numbers, throwing wealth like a storm of fire. Each time, the human raised his head and matched him. The strain showed in his face, sweat rolling down his temples, lips pressed tight in pain, but he never stopped. He gave more than he had, offering not just money but his very future. He promised years of service, promised debts that would never be paid, promised his body and soul if that was what it took. The overlord's laughter roared across the marketplace. Listen to him. Look at him, a man with nothing, offering nothing. Yet he dares to stand against me. This is madness. This is weakness. But the sisters no longer believed those words. Their glowing eyes never left the human. They saw his struggle, saw his body breaking, and still he stood. Hope, fragile as glass, began to grow stronger in their hearts. They pressed closer together, whispering silent prayers to a universe that had long ignored them. The human's hands shook now. His armor felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His throat burned with every word he spoke, but he kept raising. His voice, inside, he could feel the cracks spreading, the old wounds tearing open. But he did not care. Pain was nothing compared to the thought of the sisters being torn apart. The overlord leaned forward, his eyes glowing with fury. His cruel grin had faded. This was no longer entertainment. This was a challenge to his power, and he could not allow it. His voice dropped low, dangerous. Do you know what happens, human, when you defy me? Do you know what I do to those who humiliate me before my own court? The human lifted his head, sweat dripping from his chin. His voice came slow and steady. Then do it. Break me. Kill me. I don't care. But I will not stop. The crowd gasped. Some of them felt a chill run through their bones. This man was not bluffing. He was ready to give everything, even his life. And in his voice, there was no fear. The overlord slammed his hand down on the iron bars of the cage. The sisters jumped at the sound. His roar echoed across the market. You cannot win. You cannot stand against me. The human stepped forward, his legs shaking, but his stance unbroken. His eyes burned brighter than ever, cutting through the overlord's rage. Then why are you afraid? The words struck like lightning. The crowd fell into silence, stunned by his defiance. The overlord's fury deepened, but beneath it, a shadow of doubt flickered across his face. For the first time, he was the one being cornered. The bidding continued, each number higher, each promise heavier. The human's voice grew hoarse, his body weaker, but still he matched the overlord step for step. The crowd no longer doubted. They whispered to each other, voices filled with awe. This was no ordinary man. This was something else, something unbreakable. The sisters pressed their faces to the cage, tears shining in their eyes. Their fear had not vanished, but it had changed. They were no longer waiting for the end. They were waiting for the moment he won. The overlord's fury shook the market, his threats growing darker, but the human did not back down. Each promise, each bid, each word was a nail driven into the overlord's pride. The human's struggle was plain for all to see, his body breaking, his strength failing, but his spirit rose higher with every moment. The crowd had come for greed, for cruelty, for entertainment, but now they could not look away from the truth. Burning before them, a man with nothing had become stronger than a monster with everything. The overlord's roar thundered again, but it was no longer laughter. It was rage. He was losing control, losing face, losing the game he thought he had already won. And the human stood before him, trembling but unbroken, ready to give the final blow. The market held its breath, waiting for the next bid, the next word, the next strike in this battle of will. The sisters clung to each other, their hearts pounding, their eyes shining, and the human whispered, voice low but filled with fire, "I will not stop, not until they are mine, not until they are." Safe, for the storm had reached its breaking point. The human's strength was fading fast. His breaths came heavy, each one like a weight pressing down on his chest. His legs trembled, his back screamed with pain, and his vision blurred at the edges. The market floor beneath him felt unsteady, as if the whole place might collapse beneath his feet. Still, he stood, still. He raised his voice whenever the overlord demanded more. The crowd could see it. They saw how close he was to breaking. They leaned in, waiting for the moment when he would finally fall silent, when his body would fail him. Some were eager for it, hungry to see the overlord crush him. Others, though, felt something new stirring. Inside them, something like shame, something like hope. The overlord's smile returned, sharp and cruel. He could taste victory again. He could see the sweat pouring down the human's face, the tremble in his hands, the cracks spreading across his spirit. He raised his hand high, announcing another impossible bid, a number so heavy it was meant to bury the human alive. The sisters whimpered in their cage, clinging to each other. Their eyes burned with desperation as they watched the man who had fought so hard for them begin to falter. One of them whispered softly, though no one but her sisters could hear, "Please, don't give up, please." The human swayed where he stood. His chest heaved, his lips trembled, and for a moment it looked as though the overlord's cruelty had finally won. His knees bent slightly, as though they might give way. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the collapse, but then his eyes lifted. Again, he looked at the sisters, at their small glowing faces pressed against the iron bars, and something inside him, something deeper than pain, deeper than exhaustion, burned to life again. He remembered faces from long ago, faces of people he had failed to protect, children he could not save, friends he had lost. Their eyes haunted him every night, their voices echoing in his dreams. But this time was different. This time he had the chance to do what he could not before. His voice came hoarse and broken, but steady. "I raise it." The market erupted in chaos, gasps, shouts, disbelief. How could he still go on? How could he still fight when he had nothing left? The overlord's grin snapped into fury, his hands slamming down on the bars so hard the cage rattled. "You dare!" The overlord roared, his voice shaking the metal walls. "You dare stand against me when your body is already failing? You are not a savior, you are a fool." The human did not look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the sisters. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Better a fool who tries than a coward who turns away." The words spread through the crowd like fire. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into awe. Even those who had mocked him now felt something stirring in their chests. He was bleeding himself dry before their very eyes, yet he refused to stop. The overlord raised his voice again, each number higher than the last, his tone filled with venom. He wanted to crush the human, to erase him from the memory of the market. But the human matched him step for step. His body screamed with pain, his soul stretched to breaking, yet his voice never failed. The sisters cried silently now, tears glowing as they fell down their cheeks. They had never seen such defiance. They had never seen such strength. In that moment, they knew he was no ordinary man. He was their only chance. The overlord's rage boiled over. His cruel mask slipped, and the fury beneath it burned for all to see. "You cannot win. You will destroy yourself for nothing." The human's answer was barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the air like steel. Not for nothing, for them. His body shook violently. His knees almost gave way. The crowd thought he might fall, but he pushed himself upright again, One last time. His fists clenched, his jaw set, his eyes burning like a dying fire refusing to go out. The overlord shouted another bid, a number so monstrous the market trembled with it. Silence followed, waiting for the human's reply. Everyone thought this would be the end. Everyone thought this would finally break him. But then his voice rose, stronger than before, as if carried by something greater than his body. I raise it. I give all that I am, my blood, my life, my everything. They are mine now. The market froze. No one moved, no one breathed. The words hung in the air like a blade, sharp and final. The overlord stared at him in disbelief, his face twisting with rage. The sisters gasped, their glowing eyes wide with hope that burned brighter than fear. The human stood swaying, on the edge of collapse. His body had nothing left to give, but his spirit stood taller than ever. He had reached his breaking point, and yet he did not break. The overlord's roar shook the market, but beneath it there was something else, something he could not hide. Fear, and the human, trembling but unbroken, looked back at him with eyes that promised one truth. He would not fall. Not now, not ever. The marketplace was silent. Not a voice rose, not a breath dared to break the heavy air. The human's final words lingered like fire still burning in the lungs of every witness. His body shook as though he were standing on the edge of collapse, but his spirit towered above them all. He had declared his last bid not in wealth, not in power, but in the only thing he had left, himself. The overlord stared at him, his twisted face frozen with disbelief. For the first time, the cruel alien did not laugh. His lips pulled back to show his jagged teeth, but no sound came. He had expected the human to break, to beg, to finally crumble like dust under his heel. But instead, the human had gone further than anyone imagined possible. He had bid with his very life. The crowd stood spellbound. Some whispered in awe, others in fear. Many could not believe what they had seen. They had come for a cruel show, for the thrill of seeing helpless children, sold to the highest monster. But now they were watching something else, something they had never witnessed before. A man with nothing had stood against everything, and he had not fallen. The overlord's eyes narrowed. His pride burned hotter than his fury. He could not allow this. If he backed down now, if he allowed a human to outbid him, his control over the market would shatter. He would no longer be feared. His voice returned, low and trembling with rage. You dare humiliate me before my own court. You dare raise yourself above me when you are already broken. The human swayed where he stood, his breath ragged, but he lifted his head. His voice came soft, steady, unyielding. I don't raise myself above you. I only stand between you and them. The sisters in the cage clung to the bars, their eyes wide, glowing like tiny stars. For the first time, their tears carried not only fear but hope. They had thought no one would come. They had thought the universe had forgotten them. But here stood a stranger who had nothing, yet gave them everything. The overlord slammed his fist against the iron bars. The sound echoed across the chamber, sharp as thunder. Sparks scattered from the metal, and the sisters cried out. The crowd flinched, but the human did not move. His body trembled, his knees threatened to give, but he refused to bow. You cannot win. The overlord shouted, his voice breaking into rage. The rules of this market bind us all, and I decide who walks free. I decide who suffers, and you. He pointed a long finger at the human, shaking with fury. You are nothing but a corpse waiting to fall. But the crowd no longer saw a corpse. They saw a man standing taller than fear itself. His weakness was plain for all to see. Yet in that weakness burned something the overlord did not have and could never understand. The human lifted his voice again, though it cracked with exhaustion. If I am nothing, then nothing is stronger than you tonight. The words sliced through the marketplace like a blade of light. Some in the crowd gasped, others lowered their heads, ashamed. A few even cheered, though quickly silenced themselves in fear of the overlord's wrath. The overlord's cruel smile flickered and failed. His laughter did not return. He saw what the others saw, that even if he claimed victory now, even if he tore the human down, the story had already escaped his control. The market would remember this night, and it would not be his power they remembered. It would be the human's defiance. The bidding ended. The final words belonged to the human, and no one dared challenge them. The overlord's hands shook with rage, but he could not take back what had been spoken. The rules bound him, and he hated them more than ever in this moment. Slowly, with heavy steps, the human moved forward. Every muscle in his body screamed with pain, but he pushed on until he stood at the cage. His hand reached out, trembling, scarred, rough. The sisters pressed against the bars, their eyes shining with wonder as though he were a miracle made flesh. The overlord hissed, his voice sharp and venomous. Take them, then. Take your prize, human. But know this, you will not live to enjoy it. The market will eat you alive, and no one will stand for you when I come to take back what is mine. The human turned his head slowly, meeting the overlord's burning gaze. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the market. They are not a prize. They are children, and they are free. The silence broke. Whispers flooded the crowd, voices filled with shock, awe, and something that felt dangerously close to respect. The overlord's face twisted in rage, but the human did not care. He lowered himself to one knee, his body shaking, and reached through the bars to untie the rough cloth from the sisters' wrists. One by one, the ropes fell away. One by one, the sisters stepped forward into his trembling arms. They clung to him, small and fragile, their glowing skin pressing against his scarred armor. He held them close, his arms protective, his heart beating with relief that the crowd watched in silence. Trapped in the weight of the moment, the human had nothing left to give, yet he had won. He had broken no chains, wielded no blade, yet he had defeated the overlord's cruelty. The overlord turned away, his fury boiling in silence. The game was not over for him, no. It had only begun, but tonight he had been forced to bow to a man he called nothing. The human rose slowly, the sisters holding onto him as though he were the only solid thing in a world made of shadows. His steps were weak, his body failing, but he walked with them out of the cage, into the open. And as the market looked on, none dared stop him. The marketplace remained frozen as the human stepped forward, the four sisters clinging tightly to him. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. Even the guards, armed with blades that could cut through steel, stood stiff and silent, their eyes darting nervously between the overlord and the man who had defied him. The overlord's face was a storm of fury, his teeth ground together, his eyes burned with fire, and his hands twitched as though they longed to strike. But the rules of the market bound him, and breaking them here, in front of so many, would shatter the very fear that gave him power. He could do nothing but watch as the human walked slowly, painfully but proudly out of the cage. The sisters were small, their glowing skin dim with exhaustion, yet their eyes shone brighter than the lamps above. They clutched at his torn armor, burying their faces against him as if hiding from the world. He held them close with arms that trembled from strain, his body close to collapse. But his steps were steady. The crowd could not look away. They had come to see children sold into cruelty. Instead, they saw a man who had nothing stand against everything and still walk away victorious. Whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. Some voices trembled with awe, others with fear. Many simply could not understand. But all of them knew they had seen something that would be told and retold long after this night. The overlord's voice finally broke the silence. It was low, sharp, dripping with venom. You may leave with them tonight, human, but you will not leave this world alive. You have humiliated me. You have made me bend to nothing, and for that, you will pay. The human did not stop walking. His boots scraped against the steel floor, each step echoing in the cavernous hall. He did not turn to face the overlord, but his voice carried strong and clear. I have already paid, and it was worth it. The sisters tightened their hold on him. They did not fully understand the meaning of his words, but they understood the warmth in his voice, the steady beat of his heart, the unshakable strength in his arms to them. He was not just a man, he was their shield. The overlord growled, his rage so heavy it shook the lamps above. Yet still he did nothing. His power tonight was broken, not by force, but by something greater, something the human carried within him that no wealth, no cruelty, no weapon could destroy. The human moved slowly through the crowd. The people parted for him, stepping back as though he carried fire. None dared block his path. Some lowered their heads, ashamed to meet his eyes. Others watched him with quiet wonder. A few even bowed, the smallest sign of respect in a place where respect had no meaning. Step by step, he led the sisters through the shadows and out into the night air. The city stretched above them, towers of steel and smoke rising into a sky choked with stars. The cold wind touched their faces, carrying with it the smell of oil and dust. But to the sisters it felt like freedom. They breathed deep, their small hands clutching his armor as though they feared he might disappear if they let go. His body swayed under their weight, his vision blurred, and every bone in him begged to rest. Yet he kept walking. He could not stop, not now, not when they depended on him. Each step forward was a promise that they would stay together, that they would never again be chained, that as long as he stood, no one would tear them apart. Behind him, the marketplace roared back to life, the overlord's fury spilling into threats and curses. But none of that mattered now. The human had done what no one believed possible. He had outbid cruelty itself. The sisters finally lifted their heads. They looked around at the city, at the strange lights and endless shadows, and then back at him. Their voices came small, almost whispers, but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," one of them said, her glowing eyes shining with tears. The others nodded, pressing closer to him, their voices soft echoes of the same words. He looked down at them, his tired face breaking into the smallest, faintest smile. It was not joy, not yet, but it was something close, something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. They walked together into the night, a man who had nothing and for children who had lost everything. Yet together they carried more than all the wealth of the market. They carried a bond forged not by blood but by choice, by sacrifice, by defiance. The city lights glimmered above, cold and merciless, but they no longer felt so dark, for in the heart of that cruel world, one man had proven a truth the galaxy often forgot: that humans may stumble, humans may struggle, but when it matters most, they never let go. The story of that night spread far beyond the walls of the market. It traveled, with whispers, with awe, with fear. They called it madness, they called it foolishness, but most of all, they called it what it truly was: the strength of humanity. And as the human walked on with the sisters at his side, he did not care what name the story would carry. All that mattered was that they were together, safe, free. For the first time in years, his heart was light, even as his body bore the weight of the world. He had struggled, he had fallen, but he had risen again, not for himself, but for them. And as long as he could take one more step, he would keep them safe always.